Hello and welcome to another episode of Revitalize Portland Coalition's Revive and Thrive podcast. I'm your host, Michael Hironimus, board member here at RPC. And in this episode, we'll be continuing the special series on the mayor's race in Portland. In this episode, we'll be joined by Keith Wilson, who is one of the only candidates to not be a sitting Portland City Commissioner. He's the CEO of a local business and also the founder of a nonprofit Shelter Now. He has some ambitious plans for tackling the homeless problem in downtown. We'll be questioning him on some of his policies and how he will tackle some of these tough issues. We hope you enjoy this episode. All right. Well, Keith, thanks so much for being on Revitalize Portland Coalition's Revive and Thrive podcast. We're so grateful you've been a big supporter of Revitalize Portland Coalition and been a vocal voice, especially on the side for homelessness. You're the CEO of a freight company, and you've volunteered your time. You created a homeless shelter network. We really want to sort of understand the reasons that you're running in this mayor's race. Was there a particular moment or situation where you said, look, this is something that I need to do? What got you into the race?
Yeah. And thank you to Revitalize Portland. Michael, thank you for what you do. You do a great job at this, and I appreciate this forum. To kind of go back in time, so grew up in North Portland. Dad and brothers never graduated from high school, so we're, a bunch of warehousemen and truck drivers. So I graduated high school, put myself through college, 5 years, PCC, Oregon State. And then I'd always had a bit of a wanderlust. So I just picked everything up and I moved to New York City and said, I'm going to start my career in New York City. Did well there, moved up the ranks at NBC, and then had an opportunity to work overseas. And then I started traveling around the world and visiting these extraordinary cities. Would stop, I would work for long periods of time. And I found myself living in New Zealand, in Auckland, getting ready to accept a network television job with a brand new network there. And it was an extraordinary city. And I always say it was this beautiful city in a forest. And I thought to myself, after being gone for 8 years, if I take this job, I know I'd meet a girl. I know I'd end up getting married. And I know that my passion is such a strong driver in who I am. And I'd love the job and I'd be there the rest of my life. But it was halfway around the world from my friends and my family. And after seeing like 30 and 40 of the world's most extraordinary cities, you recognize none really compared to Portland. So I thanked them for the opportunity. I declined the job and I came back home and I started getting back into network television on the West Coast. Burbank is NBC. That was the network I worked at, indoor. Interviewed with Irwin Starr at KGW. And my father had his financial statements on the table. He had a small luggage delivery company, packages. And I tell you, the numbers leapt out at me and I realized I'd been running from math my whole life. And it was something that was a passion, but I'd always wanted the shortcuts in life, just a young guy trying to find the fun in life. And he said, well, come give it a try. And I tell you, it stuck. The operations, the complex nature, the systems approach, it just turned out to be a perfect fit for my personality. So I merged businesses, built businesses, worked on AI, all this emerging tech, and I used it to virtualize this really great sort of businesses, and I molded it. And about 6 years ago, while I'm growing this business and receiving, national accolades, I noticed my city was in decline and I didn't recognize it anymore. I started seeing hundreds of encampments all throughout our community, even on like city streets that I would drive on, like 33rd Avenue in my neighborhood. And I thought, what's going on? Started working with city officials, county officials, state officials to find out what's going on. And I didn't really see action plans. And then it kind of reached a tipping point when I ran into a high school classmate in a tent. And I thought, goodness gracious, I know I come from a hardscrabble neighborhood and we're poor,
Yeah.
but if that's the best my city can do, we've got a systemic issue. So I ran for city council 4 years ago with the premise that we're going to end unsheltered homelessness. I started opening shelters, testing shelters, sleeping in shelters, traveling around the world. As a business owner, I work with a lot of companies around the nation. And I started visiting mayors and county officials when I'd go to business meetings. And they would always open the doors. And I started learning best practices. And along that way, Michael, I accumulated, a dozen of our national leaders in ending unsheltered homelessness. And so I then joined a group called Shelter Now. It was an advocacy group to really try and improve visibility in our community, to really get our leaders to act with proven strategies like Built for Zero and sheltering strategy and such. No movement. And so we did a spin-off of Shelter Now and created what was called Shelter Portland, and that's our operational arm. We started opening shelters, testing shelters, and we have shelters open today. And so now I kept working with our elected officials in hope of 2 years ago that somebody would pick up this mantle about, we need to set up 20 or 30 nighttime emergency shelters to end unshelterable homelessness overnight. And then that allows us to really reset our economy where we're able to enforce our codes. Right now, without having enough shelter, the law states you have to decriminalize camping. So the real part of that is if we set up enough shelter, we don't want to criminalize camping, but you're not going to be able to have a tent, an RV, or sleep in a shopkeeper's corridor. So we know we have to set up enough shelter to end unshelter homelessness, but our officers need a place and a resource to send those people suffering on the street. But Michael, in the end, we can never have the street be the bottom rung of a housing ladder. And so I started running this campaign. Now, keep in mind, Michael, along the way, Titan Freight Systems is arguably one of the best transportation companies in the nation. We received National Innovator Awards. The lowest carbon footprint of any carrier in the nation, the first fleet of heavy-duty electric trucks. I'm an executive board member for U.S. High-Speed Rail, so I've got a real background in systems and operational improvement. But I know that if we're going to get Portland revitalized, if we're going to move it forward, with our city now having the highest unsheltered rate in the nation, we have to care for our neighbors before we can revitalize our city, and then start improving livability, and then start allowing our businesses to come back and the tens of thousands of souls who have left to come back. We've lost our way.
Yeah. And I know you've made homelessness sort of your main platform for your mayoral race, and obviously you're passionate about that topic. You've also made some bold claims on ending homelessness within your first year in office. Tell us about your detailed plan on how you would accomplish that and what specific metrics you would use to measure that success.
You bet. I would ask that anybody go to shelterportland.org, and there's a tab called Research, and you're going to see the budget for us to end unsheltered homelessness. Not only do we have the budget listed, we have the timeline that we're going to achieve this as, and you'll see the inputs, and so you'll see inflow and outflow from that, because you really have to understand, I can make a bold claim, but without backing it up with actual data and lessons learned, all that is what I'm telling you. What I want you to know is I'm not telling you, I'm going to show you what we've done to date. And not only that, I've been working with our county officials, the chair, our metro officials, the president, and any candidate and or elected official on how we're going to do it. And this morning alone, I had breakfast with Dan Field. He's the director of the Joint Office of Homeless Services on how are we going to pull this off. And everybody's in line. So the bold claim starts with, we end unsheltered homelessness. Let me give you a little backstory, Michael. In 2016, that was when we started the Joint Office of Homeless Services. We ceded the responsibility for caring for single adults from the city, which we had always been responsible for decades. We turned that over to the county. And in so doing, the county then stood up these brand new rules or guidelines. They took our nighttime shelters and they started converting them, defunding them, and closing them. Now, nighttime shelters are emergency shelters. They allow you to walk up and at an ad hoc basis, care for somebody in their worst time of need, down on the luck. And when I interviewed our elected officials who closed our nighttime shelters, they said that the neighbors didn't like people lining up at night for the shelters. My response was, well, the neighbors certainly don't like people living in tents outside of their homes more. And the leader who made that change said, yes, I understand that. That overall process, Michael, I thought, well, why didn't we pivot? So my leadership council from around the nation, we've been analyzing best practices, and we found out that in Boise, they have 115 people living on the street tonight. In Boston, they have 119. In Philadelphia, they have 788 people living on the street tonight in a city twice the size of Portland. Portland has 5,394. So it begs the difference. What do they know that we don't? And when our team started looking at it, what was common between all the cities in the United States who had low levels of unsheltered homelessness was ad hoc emergency nighttime shelter. Boise has walk-in. Boise, working with their mayor there, he lost a court case called Martin versus Boise. And that required him to set up enough shelter in his community if he was going to enforce his livability codes, which is camping, sanitation, DMV, and RV codes. When he lost the case, he had 120 tents around City Hall, just like that. So he told his community, we're a caring community, not a camping community. We're going to set up as many shelter beds as we need. And he did. They ended unsheltered homelessness on one particular day. And he said, here's what happened, Keith. A third of the souls that were in tents went home regionally. And when you think about that, Michael, 35% of everybody that's homeless in Portland are what's called homeless upon arrival. They were homeless in a different jurisdiction, but they came here for whatever reason. There's all sorts of reasons. It could be our drug decriminalization. It could be mental health. It could be family, friends, whatever it is. But they came here homeless. That's a third. And that matched up with the mayor's anecdote. Exactly. He said a third went home. They were drawn to friends or whatever the reason. He said a third went back home to couch surf or interaction issues with mom and dad. He said there's a host of reasons. He said, but when I ended unsheltered homelessness on that one day, a third came into my shelter. And he rapidly started finding out needs, what they wanted. And now their sheltering system is running very efficient, and you won't find anybody on the streets in Boise. Same with Boston. They primarily use nighttime shelters. In Philadelphia, almost exclusively nighttime shelters. In Portland, our joint office has 0. So we had a philosophical point where our county chair said, I'm going to defund all my nighttime shelters. And downtown, the Salvation Army Emergency Shelter at 2nd and Ankeny has been empty for 5 years. It has 126 beds empty right now. If you look at my website on the research tab, you can see my photo with the Salvation Army commander there. And it's empty tonight. And it was a female emergency shelter. It was to help our officers provide life-saving shelter for our females. And now our county hands out tents.
Yeah.
Our city then sweeps them. So you were saying, how do I end it in a year? We rapidly set up those shelters. I've already got 13 facilities highlighted. I'm going to need about 13 more to pull it off. They're low cost. The temp shelters go for $19 per person. A Safe Rest Village is $189. So not only can we end unsheltered homelessness, we can lower our overall cost of doing so. And then I've been working with the county to cover the day shelters, because just ending unsheltered homelessness at night is just saving a person's life that night. But we need to be able to connect them into the services, financial literacy, workforce development, behavioral health, and addiction services, which is so important to helping a person recovery. But in the city that I'm mayor of next year, Michael, we're going to rapidly set up, just like all the other cities have done, like Katrina, working with Mayor Landrieu in New Orleans. He rapidly set up shelters when he had 8,000 people left after FEMA moved out. And he rapidly set up this system. So I'm not daunted by the 5,300 because I have teams of mayors and county and federal officials who've already achieved this. And I mentioned to you earlier, on October 10th, they're coming to Portland, and we're putting on a Ending Unsheltered Homelessness Forum downtown at Sanctuary Hall. And we're inviting the city in to come and talk to these officials, and they will give first-person anecdotes of how they ended unsheltered homelessness and how Portland's going to do the same.
But you will be willing to say that there's a certain percentage of the homeless that don't want to go to shelters, right? They want to remain on the streets. The Supreme Court recently ruled on the Grants Pass case, which placed limits on local public camping bans. In Oregon, however, we're still sort of restricted by the House Bill 3115. Which directs public camping can only be outlawed when there's adequate shelter in place. Are you in favor of amending or revoking that House bill? And how would you work around it if it were still in place?
So it's not an issue because I'm going to set up enough shelter to care for everybody in my community. So as mayor, I can't let people live on the street. We just cannot leave people on the street. So House Bill 3115, as you stated that you cannot criminalize people living on the street if you don't have ample shelter for them, right?
Right.
So it essentially is a decriminalization bill, but it's not necessary because next year, after we strip away, if we have 5,300 people on the street, we know we have 800 empty beds in our system right now. We know we can't bring families into a shelter system. We know we can't bring unaccompanied minors. And so these are things I've been working with county. They're your responsibility, and they accept that. It's always been their responsibility. It's single adults, and we need about 2,400 beds to do that. But Michael, the most important thing is I'm going to set up those 2,400 beds, low cost, temporary. The mayor of Boise and his anecdote, holds true, we know only a third are going to come in. So that's going to drop down to the 800. So we rapidly decline. We rapidly will flex down. And we're able to meet that spirit of House Bill 3115, but we're caring for everybody. So I'm all for amending it to give cities maximum resources. But next year, it's not going to be an issue for us because we're just going to provide that basic care immediately for everybody in our community.
Along those same lines, what's your view on the public-private partnerships in regards to homelessness, specifically when we're talking about maybe shelters that are religious in nature, or private shelters such as Bybee Lakes and so forth? Are you working with them in conjunction, or do you think that the public space can handle this on their own as is? What's your plan?
We're going to end unsheltered homelessness as a community. We're going to work with Metro and County. Bybee Lakes, one of the things, that 5,300 that I talked to you about, one of the things is fully funding Bybee Lakes. Another is fully funding the safe shelter. I'd say 13 of the shelters who want to set up, I'd say about 7 or 8 of them are religious-based, but do not have religious undertones. It's just a way, it fits their mission, their benevolent mission to care for Portlanders. Right. It's just simply using their common rooms or their community rooms. I've got community center set up. Michael, the only way we care for Portlanders is all Portlanders work together to do it. The neighborhood emergency teams, we have 2,000 volunteers, and I spoke to the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management director of the NET. I said, as mayor, I'd like to activate them. I'd like to pull these guys out for 2 hours on the front side of the shelter and 2 hours on the back side. Will you do it? He said, it's a great training for earthquake preparedness. Yes, I'm all in. And those are all volunteers. But at the shelters tonight, I want everybody to know, these are $27 per hour employees. They're full benefits. We only need about 115 to get this lift off the ground. And it's all on that budget I talked to you, because I want full visibility for everybody to know that this is not pie in the sky. It has been developed. And if you go to Shelter Portland, you'll see the timeline, all the conversations that I've had from around the nation. You'll see the mayor of Boise, his anecdote to say exactly how he ended unsheltered homelessness and how we're going to do the same. So, well, there's some great questions you asked, Michael. Do we do public-private partnership? Yes, because Mayor Bud Clark is a really renowned mayor that we had. He ended unsheltered homelessness in the 80s and 90s. The team who implemented his ending unsheltered strategy is on my team, Mike Lindbergh and Dan Steffi. Dan Steffi was the mayor's assistant and implemented the program and famously did it in 12 months. And here's the irony, Michael. That template that Mayor Clark put down is being used in most cities in the United States. We had a nationally lauded program. We've fallen so far away from our leadership in Portland, we can't even take our own advice right now, and we're leaving thousands of people on the street.
Right. Well, I want to talk a little bit more about the relationship with the county, because ultimately the county is actually responsible for the homeless situation, right? And so as mayor, you're sort of hamstrung a little bit in that regard. How do you view the relationship right now between the city and county? And what would you do as mayor to sort of end those bonds, if you will? And what do you think about the current county chair?
Yeah, well, let's go back a little bit. So if you talk to people in some of those meetings between city and county, you'll hear that sometimes our past county chair and our current mayor wouldn't even be in the same room together.
Right. Which is ridiculous.
Now, when you think about that and that toxic relationship, how are you going to really work together? I mean, we got to stow personal animus towards one another and care for Portlanders. So now let's talk about today. I don't know if it's that much different. I know Chair Vega Peterson is struggling, and I certainly know our mayor is struggling, but they should be coming together, meeting every week, because we have thousands of people on the street. We're just not doing that, Michael. How will I work? I've already begun working with Chair Vega Peterson. She's going to be my partner in this. I've already started working through the budget. And if you look at the budget on Shelter Portland, you'll see it's highlighted for City of Portland Public Safety. We have 400 people that are going to die on our street this year. That is not a county issue. Those are Portlanders. So I'm not ceding control to county. We are going to end the shelter homelessness to care for those people on the street. But I've asked county to then fund and care for the day shelters, which are health and human services. It's the connection to services, the county outreach workers, to make sure that those individuals at the day shelter can plug into our housing navigation system and behavioral health and addiction services. So we've already begun talking about how we're going to split the budget. Our city is currently spending $300 million a year on the aggregated costs of unsheltered homelessness. 26 million in sweeps, 35 million in firefighter and police overtime, 10 million in warrants, all wasted money. The cost the cost to just set up the nighttime shelters is less than 25 million. This is a 200 million plus savings. So I'm not going to be pandering to the county. I would love their help, but we're acting. I have asked them to cover the day shelters. The day shelters aren't necessary, but it really allows us to care for everybody in that 24-hour cycle, right?
Yeah.
You don't need as many day shelters. You only need 4, maybe 8. We're going to need about 24, 26 nighttime shelters.
Yeah. Well, and the amount of money that the Joint Office of Homeless Services has a huge coffers, right?
Huge,
Over the
Michael.
past 5 years, they've
Massive.
spent nearly $1 billion, which
Yes,
divide that by 5,300 people, we could have bought everybody Ritz-Carlton penthouse suites at this point.
that's right.
And so it seems ridiculous that we keep going into this cycle. And, just going back to Bybee Lakes real quick, last year, Bybee Lakes was in a little bit of a budget deficit, and there was serious concerns about whether they were going to continue operations. And luckily, and they, up until that point, they had never taken any public funds.
Yeah.
And so there was this push, well, could we get some funds? And the county made them go through all of these hoops, right? Full financial audit, some strings attached, so forth. But when you look at the other service providers that Joint Office of Homeless Services utilizes, we don't see that level of scrutiny. Why do you think that is?
I don't, it comes down to the philosophy. So we changed our guidelines in 2016. We used to require engagement if you were in a shelter. In other words, within 90 days, you had to start focusing on the root cause of why you're unsheltered. It's called requiring engagement. We used to have stay limits. You can stay here, but the max time is 90 days or 180 days. Michael, we pulled all requirements. So there are no more engagements. You can live in a shelter for years on end now. We're not moving you through. At Bybee Lakes, they have engagement requirements. They require work. They require sobriety. It's clean and sober. At our shelters now, they're all low barrier, and none of them require clean and sober. Bybee Lakes holds people to a high level, right? But that's how we learn, and that's how we move out of these addictions and or circumstances. I think they have a good model. It's a high barrier system. The county wants to do everything low barrier, but the way I look at it, we need low, medium, and high. We need a full continuum so somebody can get out of Hooper detox and not go into a low barrier shelter where they're going to be constantly encouraged to use fentanyl again, right? I think Bybee Lakes is an important model that we have to have in that continuum. And I think we're stepping over the dollar to get to the nickel. Look, we're setting up a task site in North Portland now, breaking ground. It's been going on for 14 months. We're up to $10 million and we haven't even had one bed night yet. Are we really spending our money wisely when Bybee Lakes could be open in 30 days instead of 30 months? When the emergency is acute and it's affecting our livability, our public safety, we're not acting fast enough. We're certainly not acting in a sense of urgency in a humanitarian crisis. So the answer is I think we should be looking at all resources immediately.
Been talking to some current city councilors, and they're frankly worried about the budget next year. Huge budget deficit. Some businesses are leaving. We're losing population for the first time in practically Oregon's existence.
That's
And
right.
so there is going to be some real budgetary issues next year. So how do you balance that with your aggressive plan for creating these services?
So I know, so waste reduction. So, we're not going to be able to create revenue because property taxes are plummeting, because a lot of these business office owners are now reassessing and the property taxes are falling. We certainly know high earners are leaving. We are in dire straits. So to think that we can have 5 or 10 years is fool's gold right now for our cities and our ability to revitalize. We have to act and act fast. So I had noted to you, the spend on our budget is $300 million. We need that waste reduced immediately. And we do that by caring for everybody and not allowing the streets to be utilized any longer. We then take that savings and we start focusing on revitalizing our economy. We have to spend that $25 million to get the $300 million back. That's that return on investment, if you will. So That's how we stabilize our government. But then you're right. But the good thing, though, Michael, the solution isn't complex. If we restore cleanliness and safety to our community, we'll welcome an influx of investment, jobs, and families. You said it earlier. We grew population for 40 straight years, one of the most incredible strings of any city in the United States, except for the last 5 years. Can we get that back? You bet. But we've got to restore livability. We've got to improve safety, which is at historic lows when we compare ourselves against the nation right now. Our arrest rate for property crime is at 5%, the worst in the United States. We are shoulder to shoulder with Oakland and St. Louis. Are we really going to get somebody to put a business downtown when most are leaving right now?
Right.
We restore cleanliness. We no longer allow people to be in tents, RVs, or sleep in a shopkeeper's door, a corridor, and treat it like a bedroom or a toilet, right?
Right.
These are basic things that we always managed well. I'm pretty bullish on the city, but we got to go through some very difficult times this next year.
Yeah, and that leads to two other issues, right? Budgetary, as well as I would assume that your plan deals a lot with first responders.
Yeah.
Currently, Portland's Police Bureau has about 880 sworn officers, where we should probably have north of 1,000, if not 1,200. We have one of the lowest staffing rates per capita in the United States. And so how do you increase police sworn officers, people, boots on the street, while balancing budgetary issues and also, what's occurring downtown with, sweeping homeless and so forth?
Right. It's a great question. I always tell everybody in that elevator pitch, it's a three-pronged approach. First and foremost, we end unsheltered homelessness because everything else hinges on that critical first priority. The next priority is restoring and reducing the burden on our overloaded public safety system. So you're hitting on that. The third is revitalize and better everybody's livability. So that second point you just brought up was public safety in general, and then the police. So you're right. We can add more police officers, and in a business, it's called resourcing up. Or we can take away what they're primarily responding to. 52% of all the arrests in any given year are of the unsheltered. We're spending over half of our arrest time that our officers are providing arresting the same population over and over again. The unsheltered is 1% of our population. We're spending 50% of our arrest time. And here's how it's manifested in poor performance for all of us. 10 years ago, a priority 1 call was answered in 6 minutes, right around the national average. Today, if you call for a priority 1 call, your loved one is in harm's way, you're in a terrible traffic accident, an officer is going to arrive in 24 minutes. That's a priority 1 call. And if you have a low priority, 92 minutes and sometimes not at all. So let's get back to the question at hand regarding officers. Our officers are spending their time arresting the wrong people because unsheltered homelessness needs to be ended. We should not have people on our streets. You won't find that in most cities in the United States. So end unsheltered homelessness, allow our officers to get back to community policing, arresting fentanyl dealers, restaffing our graffiti, our illegal dumping divisions, restaffing our traffic division, our property crime division, which just got disbanded 2 weeks ago, and then hire the 80 police officers we have authorized and not hired yet. But if we're trying to go out to the nation and say, come work for Portland, there's a Department of Justice injunction on us for excessive force. And, oh, by the way, half of all the arrests you're going to make next year is going to be the unsheltered souls, the same guys over and over and over again, come work for the best police force in the United States. Now, that's a misnomer. We have to be the best police force in the United States. We don't want our officers arresting and criminalizing unsheltered homelessness because they shouldn't be on the street. Now we can fill those 80 roles. Then we determine how many do we need. Yes, Michael, we do need more police officers. How many we need, I don't know. Let's end unsheltered homelessness. Get our police officers back to responding to our actual priority 1 calls when we need them. And then we see how many we need. If we want to put a circle of 1,000, it just sounds sexy, right? But I do believe we need more officers to get back to community policing, to restoring the confidence in our public safety officials.
Yeah. And us here at Revitalize Portland Coalition, we've been pushing for the civil compromise and drug diversion program. It's very similar to the drug courts that they have King County, Seattle, Marion County here in Oregon. What do you think about this idea? And do you think the city could establish a program like that here?
In business, it's called, you either want to decentralize or you want to centralize. When you're adding a drug court, you're decentralizing. So you're just adding another layer of complexity. I think if the money's there, if D.A. Vasquez, if that's his North Star, I'll back what he wants to do in that regard. I kind of went a different track, though. I founded the Multnomah County Homeless Court Program. So I just funded it with Deputy DA and an Assistant DA 3 months ago. So Ellen Rosenblum is going to be the judge for the Homeless Court Program. She's our Attorney General. She retires here in a few months, and she's agreed to be the judge, which I think is fantastic. But when you come into one of my day shelters, I've got a day shelter on 82nd Avenue. When you come in, if you agree to a 4-month program, you got to go through and work on yourself. It's oftentimes recovery. It's financial literacy. And we also most likely have a job for you, right? So Work Systems gives me grants for jobs. At the end of that 4 months, the DA comes into the shelter. The judge comes in, the public defender. You graduate, and we remove and expunge all your misdemeanors. And you generally are going to owe $5 or $6 grand. And that's keeping you from getting into housing, because a landlord is never going to approve your application because you have $10,000 worth of fines, and you might have 20 misdemeanors, but ability misdemeanors. It's pooping in a shopkeeper's doorway. It's peeing. It's nuisance. Those are all because of unsheltered. So it might be drugs as well. We reduce and remove that, and often we have housing at the end of it. So I'm all for considering a drug court. I've heard a lot of people say they work. I've heard a lot of people say they don't. I've heard a lot of people, we've got our DA, let the DA run the system through the DA system. The city I'm going to operate next year, Michael, we're not going to be arresting unsheltered. We're going to be giving them warnings, but you're not going to be sleeping in corridors. You're not going to be in tents. You're not going to be in RVs. You're not going to be in cars. All the DMV rules are going to be applied. We're going to have established guardrails for every citizen. We're not going to have a lawless community outside those guardrails anymore that have decriminalized. So it's not going to be as big of an issue next year. That was a big happy if somebody wants to run it. If I will support DA Vasquez if he wants to create a drug court. I would follow his lead on that, as he's the expert. But frankly, I don't see decentralizing our criminal justice system is really necessary at this time. I think if we just care for our citizens and the shelter homelessness, stop moving them through the criminal justice system and just remove that altogether and get to Boise, where they have 119 on the street versus 5,000.
Right.
We're going to see our businesses flourish, and but we do need to aggressively go after drug dealers. I mean, we need to aggressively go after drug dealers, because we cannot have them in the tents next to their users that are in the next tent. That all has got to go, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I want to shift gears a little bit for a second. We're talking about mayor and coming into office next year. Next year is probably one of the most pivotal years in terms of government structure in Portland's history, right? We've got a new charter, city charter. We're going to be implementing a new city administrator's role. What's your take on the new government structure? Perhaps even touch on the ranked choice voting that is part of that. And how do you feel that this is an opportunity to create a new systems, just like a business owner would?
This template that this mayor sets up will be somewhat the template for the next generation. I like how you say it's an enormous opportunity, Michael, but it's an enormous challenge, and it's going to usher in an enormous amount of chaos. So I've already begun the process. Let me kind of tell you how I'm approaching this. I love that it's a vertical enterprise. It's just like a board of directors with your council. Your council or the board of directors, they will create the policies and laws. As the mayor, as the CEO, it is my requirement to implement them at the spirit they were passed over to me. I am the operations or the implementer of those policies. That's what I do as a CEO of my current business. Now it's a matter of who I wrap around me. So I've already begun working with Michael Jordan, our city administrative officer, to understand the mechanics of the city. And we have another meeting coming up here in 2 weeks. I want to know how do the mechanics, how do the vertical structure work? But more importantly, I want to know the horizontal structure. How do I create streamlined communications to get rid of waste? Right now, when you think about permitting that we just consolidated, if you were building something, you would have to work with 3, 4, 5 different bureaus under, 3 or 4 different mini mayors. And it was brutal. That all goes away. We get to now do like a permitting strike team. We get to find out where the process mapping is. We get to reduce delay and waste. But here's what I think the critical point is. The city administrator that I hire is going to come from one of our top performing cities in the United States, who is already managing the size of a city that we are or larger, has a confirmed record of success, and can come in and understand how the enterprise should work because they will have managed a high-performing enterprise previous. My chief of staff, which I've already started interviewing for, is going to be somebody from our city, somebody who has decades of experience in our institution, understanding the parts and the pieces and the policies, so I can work with council well, so we can be a real fine-tuned communication tool between one another, but somebody who understands the city, because I lack institutional knowledge in the city. Now, as a CEO, managing one of the highest performing transportation companies in the nation, I understand the mechanics of how to do it. Between those three individuals and the council, I'm neutralizing my weaknesses and accentuating my strengths. But more importantly, I want to make sure we do not politicize that city administrative officer. It will not be a friend of mine. It will not be somebody who's in the current city, because we need that fresh, dynamic voice from outside our city to tell us, here's how it works in other cities, and not come in with pre-existing ideas or relationships so they can really see the enterprise clearly. And that's what you do when you bring in somebody new.
Yeah. And do you like the current structure? Because talking about budgetary issues, currently we have it set up with the city administrator, an assistant city administrator, and then I believe 6 lower positions for each of the different public works and all the other different bureaus. Do you like the way that's set up, or do you think that there's some fat to be trimmed there as well?
Yeah, the fat we'll see. When we set up the KPIs on the individuals and the bureaus, we'll see where that fat is. It'll come up quickly. To answer your question, yes, I like the structure. It's pretty standard as it's set up. You're looking at a city administrative officer who's going to run the day-to-day operations with your deputies, which are, they act as vice presidents, if you will, of their divisions. And each division will have its own budget, if you will. So it's a pretty streamlined approach, and we can really set up KPIs for each one of those individuals. And more importantly, we can clearly set up KPIs for those service areas. And there are so many holes out there, Michael, with street cleaning. If you're in a street, I rode with street cleaners last year, and we're driving by the Parks Bureau. Street cleaners are on Kirby. Let's talk about just physical. Here's what's going on. In a street cleaner, we're at the Kirby facilities, North Portland. We're driving by the Division Street Parks Division, right outside their door, and I'm like, okay, so let's say you need a light for this, or something goes on with your unit, and we got to go in and go get a part. We can just go into that and just grab one of their parts. Their common parts, oil, lights, you name it. And he says, nope, we don't have a way to talk between our two computer systems. Our cost centers are different. I said, wait a second. You don't have a purchase order where you can just send that inter-department cost over to Kirby? And so you'd have to drive all the way back to Kirby to get the part to then get back. He says, yeah. And I said, well, that's a 3-hour waste. He says, I know, but there's no communications between the departments. I went, wow, Michael, for somebody who knows how to do waste reduction, the bar is so low. That's the tremendous opportunity, or the enormous opportunity we have, is a gap analysis. Set up the 26 bureaus, create your 20 most normalized pieces, parts, IT. Where's the synergy? Where's the gap? Where's it missing? Why does Parks have a computer system that's different than transportation and or Bureau of Planning and Sustainability? And is there synergies there? It's checkers. It's not 3D chess, I promise. There's so many there's so many failings going on in our city right now, Michael.
Yeah, well, and that's why everyone's so frustrated, and that's why this is such I believe, a pivotal mayor race, because you not only have, I think, a rising tide, right? We've got the new DA, we've got this new government structure, we've got Bate, thankfully, is back, so it feels like we're riding a good wave. It's just, we need somebody that can really,
Michael,
take the reins on this, right?
I agree. And I keep saying that we can't accept the status quo. I mean, the leaders we have had the opportunity, and they could have gotten us to this point that I've outlined to you today. What I've talked to you about today is not rocket science. Right. We are a national symbol of failed policies and failed leadership in Portland. We are the lowest performing city in the United States for a dozen metrics. Lowest job creation, lowest downtown traffic, lowest arrest rate for property crime. And I could
Yeah.
just go on. And I keep
Well, and
seeing
I
it.
want to talk about some other policies as well, particularly around housing, because there seems to be this disincentive wave for private development downtown. It started with, rent control and inclusionary zoning, high permitting fees, and then obviously the public image and civil unrest downtown. Well, there was a report that recently came out that said we're on pace to have 500 permitted units this year in Portland, which is the lowest amount since the great financial crisis. How do we turn this around? How do we incentivize more private development and increase our housing stock for affordability?
Yeah. Everything hinges, like I said, on my 3 priorities. Everything hinges on ending unsheltered homelessness first. When you have tens of thousands of people leaving and businesses failing, you have to right that ship, fix the biggest issues. Now, we have investment that is just leaving our community, Michael. And look at this. John Blumenauer's moving to Joinery from downtown. Fuego, my good friend Bob Workmeister, closing 12 of his food carts in the next month.
Right. Right.
Mothers who's barely hanging on. How do we get investment back? Well, we stabilize our community, we improve livability, and the city will start to revitalize itself. You were talking about housing. So we have 500 units. My opponents say that they're so proud of all the housing changes and development and permitting structure. And I can't believe they're touting their record with 500 permits on the book. We're on fire. And if we don't continue to build and build fast, we're not meeting the governor's mandate to hit 5,000 units. So I kind of flip it on them. We have a $3 million SDC waiver for anybody who converts an office to a residential. And I'm explaining to everybody, but not one company has taken advantage of it. So I'm trying to say, pull that money, get rid of the requirement that you can only use a building that's that needs earthquake retro. I'm like,
Well, yeah.
I started telling her, if you expected 10 conversions, put that money in a $30 million bucket and give any developer $60 per square foot. And I don't care if you want to buy an inexpensive building that needs retro, then put it in. Grab a Class A facility that's, post 1994 and give them $60 per square foot. And if it's 10,000 square feet, you get $6 million. Get ready, get set, develop, go.
Yeah.
Quit putting these blinders on our developers. Let developers develop. If we truly want to convert, let them convert. In 2 years, we haven't had one conversion yet. You go to other cities who do that per square foot, they've done 1,200 units in 2 years. But here's the other thing that that other municipalities do. If you convert an office to residential, we will get you the permit in 2 months because they're serious about conversions. In Portland, we need to pivot. So we have this program, this $3 million SDC, but you can only upgrade a building if it needs earthquake. But Michael, we have so many empty buildings that have already been earthquake retrofitted. They're ready to go, but yet we haven't pivoted and said the program's not working. We could be adding so many more residential units quickly if we just pivot the program. The money's already there. So fix it, right? In business, Michael, you try, you fail fast, you improve, and then you try again. We're at the try and we're at the fail long. We have to recognize what's not working, pivot, fix it, and let developers get going. It's a frustration I see from the outside looking in.
Yeah. Well, the other problem is that, office builds and apartment builds are two different things. I know you talked about the earthquake structure, but there's also system structures that need to go in. There's a lot of money that goes into building out this housing infrastructure as opposed to office floor plates. So that needs to be considered as well. And, basically the crushing permitting fees as well. There needs to be something that handles that.
There's a $10 billion HUD grant that was just provided for office or residential. That's free money. Go get it.
Yeah.
There's $25 million in transportation-oriented design for downtown cores that have low vacancy rates to convert. That's $25 million of no interest loans. It's free capital. Go get it. And that's the beauty of the federal government. They're ready to help. We need to be able to help our developers access those funds to make that conversion. You're right. But there's money there to provide that transition. Because our downtown core is everything for us. We have to have a thriving downtown core. it really is that magnet for our overall. It's not just Portland. I mean, we're talking about Oregon. Without a thriving Portland, we're challenged with having a thriving Oregon.
I wanted to touch on one thing because it was kind of unique. You don't hear about it a lot, but you had mentioned wanting to bring the 2040 Olympics to the Pacific Northwest. Hey, why would you want to do that, or why would you prioritize such a large scale event when we have so many issues already on our plate?
Now, remember, as your mayor, we will end unsheltered homelessness next year. We will revitalize in the out years of 2, 3, 4, and we're going to be the most livable city in the world, right? That's my goal. That's my vision. My mission is to operationalize that next year. So let's set up that vision. But here's the beauty about the Olympics. The Olympics are really, they're very expensive. But I tied it in with high-speed rail. So I just had a planning meeting today on a bill that's being written for the 2025 session to begin the funding for high-speed rail through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So there's a $10 billion grant money that we're accessing right now. So that bill will go forward, and we're beginning the planning funding for high-speed rail, the Cascadia, to go from Portland to Seattle to Vancouver, BC. Michael, the fun part of that is that the United States builds big things when there's one of two things, a war or a spectacle. The Olympics are used as that bright, shiny object I put out there because we need the high-speed rail corridor built. Because when we build that corridor from Portland to Seattle, it will reduce inner-city traffic by 80%. And you're there in an hour. You have a noon lunch and you're back home. We have we have capital and people and innovation moving back. It's the new Main Street. But to get to that, I created that spectacle because I wanted people to say, and at the end of it, we can have the first 3-city, 2-country Olympics, and we share the cost. Now, it's a dream. I want people in Portland to dream big. We always used to. We had the first light rail system. We had all these extraordinary things, trams. We've stopped dreaming in Portland, and we're just trying to get through the day right now. And we're sick and tired of feeling sick and tired. I put that on there because I wanted people to know that there is a tomorrow, but we got to go through this very difficult today to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. It does help with infrastructure. And so I do get that part.
Yeah, they're doing that. We're going to have our first high-speed rail train in 2028. It goes from Vegas to LA. And they said, and the Biden administration and Secretary Buttigieg just funded it, and it's going to be up and running by the LA Olympics 2028. And, they're going to build a mile like a week of high-speed rail because they have a spectacle. They have the LA Olympics. They want to showcase the first United States fully functioning high-speed rail line at the Olympics. You see it, the spectacle drove them forward. Now, I know the 2040 is a pie in the sky, and I would never expect Portland to be alone. But if we could shoulder with Seattle and Vancouver and do it with and between those cities with high-speed rail, that 250 miles per hour. I know the Biden administration, I know Secretary Buttigieg is very interested in the Cascadia line. It's his third highest priority. And we're starting the funding bills, and I would love to be our mayor and really be that very important cheerleader that all major projects need. So,
good. Well, we're running up against time. Is there anything that you want our members to know about you and your campaign before?
Yeah, I want to be clear. My opponents had years to build a coalition and deliver results, and they haven't. They've refused to follow the path of other cities who have solved these crucial issues we now face. All the things that I've mentioned today, Michael, have been done for generations. Caring for your people at night, earthquakes, unsheltered homelessness is not endemic in the United States other than here. The current elected officials have wasted hundreds of millions of dollars with no results. And as a result, we've lost families, we've lost jobs, we've lost small businesses, and worst of all, we've lost lives. There's 400 people that are going to die on our streets this year. We've lost our way, Michael. So what I would say is go to our websites for the other candidates. Make sure they articulate what you want to see in the Portland that you want tomorrow. I have a clear, delineated plan to end unsheltered homelessness next year that will immediately restore public safety and then will better everybody's livability. I ask, go look at the other candidates, and if they've been able to articulate what you want, I understand that, because if people like the way the city is running, I'm not your guy, because I'm not happy with the way a city is running. But if they want real change, I'm asking for them to vote for me and to support me and to help turn our city around. I've got relationships with almost all of our elected officials, and they've already been meeting with me to determine what are we going to do that second week of November, because they know they're being called into a planning meeting because it's go time. It's not going to be champagne time. We'll pop that cork on the champagne at the Rose Festival in 2025. But it is steel-toed boots, it's lunch pail time, and we're going to care for our citizens beginning in January. I've got shelters I've already prepped to get stood up. You're going to see a mayor who's caring for our citizens, and it's not just the unhoused, but by providing that care, we then are going to provide for the housed, and we're all going to have a dignity, decency focus on our city again.
Good. Well, Keith, we really appreciate your time being
Pleasure,
on Revitalize Portland Coalition's Revive and Thrive podcast. Good luck in the upcoming race.
Thank you.
And thanks for your time.
And thanks for this audience. It was wonderful, Michael, and thanks for this privilege.